Okay, so here in Speyer Cathedral in Germany, we see the problems we've been looking at solved. Here, the architects were able to achieve both light and height. And they did that by employing one of the Romans' favorite devices, the groin vault. So rather than just have one big barrel vault running right down the nave, which made it difficult to add windows on the side, instead they did a series of groin vaults, and that allowed them to put a clerestory windows along the whole length of the nave, and you can see that here. So if you look, you can see that each bay or each section is a groin vault, and then under it there are two clerestory windows on each side. Now, what they've given up here is the gallery level. So we're back to a two-story elevation, but it's the nave arcade and the clerestory. Still though, and if you look down at the people on the bottom, you can see this is a very tall church. So they've achieved height, they've achieved light, and they've done it by using old Roman techniques. And this, in fact, was an old Ottonian church, and I showed you this comparison in the beginning between the Ottonian church and this church, but this was rebuilt. So they took the old Ottonian church and then they re-roofed it with stone vaulting. Here's another example of a Romanesque church. Now, one of the things, and we don't really have the time in this class to get into this level of detail, but one thing that makes Romanesque architecture really fun and interesting is that each region had a very distinct tradition. So there's a lot of variability among Romanesque architecture from region to region, even just in France. One of the regions that was kind of important was Normandy. This was an area where the Vikings had conquered and then settled along the coast of northern France. Normandy, you probably know it because of the D-Day beaches. That's where the landing was on D-Day, was in Normandy. But in any case, the architecture, the Romanesque architecture in this particular region of France became really influential and important to the development of the Gothic style, which is going to be our final topic. So I wanted to just take a moment to show you an example of a Norman style Romanesque church. So we're looking at the Church of Saint Etienne in Cannes in France. And you can see the front of it. Now the very top of these towers are later, they're Gothic rebuilds, but the rest of the church has that almost Carolingian or Ottonian look to it, right? With the high Westwerk and the towers on the front. Romanesque readability means that we look at the strip buttressing along the front and we can see that it has a central nave and two side aisles before we ever go inside. But let's go inside. Here on the interior, you really see everything come together. If you look up, you see this really beautiful, elaborate, six-part groin vaulting on the ceiling. And you'll notice that they've managed here to have a three-story elevation. So there's a clerestory, a gallery, and then the nave arcade. So they've managed to put everything back in, a three-story elevation along with this groin vaulting. The vaults themselves they're really exaggerated, right? How much of the work those vaults are doing. And this particular type of groin vault is called a rib vault because on each of the groin vaults you can see there's an extra bit of masonry that's called the rib, because that's what it looks like. And it's almost like it always makes me think of tent poles. If you've ever gone camping, and put up a tent the way you have the pole that's actually forming the structure of the tent, and then the fabric is sort of just stretched between them. That's what this masonry looks like, as though the ribs are really doing all the work, and they are. And then the rest of the masonry in that vault can be much thinner and therefore more lightweight and can sort of be stretched up high like you see here. So those are rib vaults. So the 3-story elevation, the sexpartite rib vaults, all of this gives it this high height, right? The height and then the light, which is what the builders have been after. So here they've achieved it. All right, let's leave that behind for a minute, and I want to introduce the second topic for the Romanesque period. So from the Romans, we get the vaulting. The other Roman tradition that gets reintroduced during the Romanesque period is the revival of architectural sculpture, stone sculpture. And of course, if you think back to Greek and Roman buildings, we looked at tons of architectural sculpture, all the statues on the outside and all the elaborate sculpted masonry. But they haven't really been doing that on churches for a long time. It gets revived in this time period. And the first place that we see that happen is in the capitals. So here you're looking at carved column capitals. This is from a church at Moissac in France, the Church of St. Peter. And what you're looking at is the cloister. Okay, so what is a cloister? When you think of a cloister, you think of a quiet space. And in fact, a cloister is a peristyle garden. If you remember in a Roman house, the peristyle garden was the kind of backyard that had a columned walkway around the perimeter of it, borrowing from Hellenistic architecture into the Roman house. And then it got used in Roman public spaces like Roman fora. And now we're seeing it used in churches so that you could have a contemplative garden that would be quiet with these shaded walkways around the perimeter of it where you could sit and pray or read, and it would be distraction free. So cloisters became very common in church architecture. So on the columns that make that columned walkway, they started to put these elaborately carved capitals. And remember that I told you that variety in decoration, well, variety in general, is a hallmark of the Romanesque style. There was regional variety. And now we're seeing that even within one church, you can have lots and lots of variety. It's as though they let every single stonemason who was working on the carving just make something up himself and come up with something creative and beautiful so that each one of these columns is different. So some of them are religious, they're scenes from the Bible. Others are images of monsters, or they're abstract patterns, or they're sort of classicizing designs, but each one is different. I'm getting some interference from a lawnmower next door. I hope you can still hear me. Let me show you a detail. Here on the detail from the same church at Moissac, you can see the animals on the column in the front. They're lions, pairs of lions. All right, this is getting really loud. I think I'm going to have to pause. All right, I'm going to try to keep going now. I think it's gotten a little quieter. So the first place we start to see this exploration into stone sculpture in churches was on the column capitals. The next place we start to see it become really elaborate is on the doorways, or portals as they're called. Remember that before, in the churches that we've looked at earlier, the exterior of churches tended to be very plain. So with these carved portals, we're really entering into a new era in church decoration. This is from that same church, Moissac in France. And you'll notice that there is a big area above the door that's sort of like a half circle. That's called a tympanum. You'll see that word on the next slide. And then there's also all of the other additional, I won't go into all the terminology, but all of the other elements on the door that are creating the full decoration of the portal. Let's zoom in on the tympanum now. This actually illustrates a very specific text. It illustrates the 4th chapter of the book of Revelation. So Christ is shown in the center in majesty at the second coming, or judgment day. So this is the moment where you're going to be judged. Oh my gosh, now I have another neighbor with a leaf blower. I can't win. I'm going to press on. I want to finish. So it's Judgment Day. And remember, we started to see more images of a kind of like judging Christ. This idea that you have to, behave according to the rules of the church or you're going to be damned. So Christ here is shown wearing a crown. He's much larger than the other figures. He's very imposing and impressive. And he has the symbols of the evangelists or gospel writers on either side. So you'll see, if you look closely, a man, an eagle, a lion, and an ox. And those stand for Matthew, John, Mark, and Luke in order. Just to the side of those symbols are 2 angels, one on either side, holding scrolls. And if you look, the angel on the right, you can really see the scroll in his hand, and that will help you spot him. Those scrolls are essentially the naughty or nice list. They're saying who's been saved and who's been damned. And then the rest of the tympanum is taken up with images of the elders or kings of this world, and they represent humanity. These are all details from the book of Revelation. And separating the 3 rows of kings is this wavy line. That's the rippling sea of glass from the book of Revelation. So we're getting a lot of really precise details from the text illustrated here on the tympanum. But what's fun about this, what I find really great, I told you that there's a lot of variety in Romanesque art. There's also just a sense of almost kind of whimsy, like each one of these kings is shown in this really individual way. Like they all have different positions and almost different expressions on their face. They're very lively. There's something that's just very appealing about the way that figures are depicted. They're restless, they're energetic, and that energy that you're seeing is called dynamic linearism. And all of these different lines and all of the dynamism here is meant to show the presence of the Holy Spirit. So that's actually done very intentionally. Now, from that same portal, there's one more feature I wanted to look at, which is what you might think of as like a doorpost right down the center of the doorway. It's called a trumeau, and that word is in the caption, trumeau. And here you can see another example of dynamic linearism, that same kind of interesting energy and posture in the figure of the elder or the saint. It's probably an Old Testament figure like Jeremiah on that trumeau. And you see this sort of long, twisted body and the long, twisted hair. And he's on the side of the trumeau. And then the side facing the front are paired lions. This is that same motif that we've been seeing the whole semester. Paired lions at a doorway as a kind of protective element. Think of the Lion Gate at Mycenae, for example. All right, I want to show you a few more examples of carving from the Romanesque period. This is one of my favorite carved capitals. So this is another column capital. It's from a column that's in the nave of the church at Autun, France. So it's a nave capital as opposed to the cloister, right? Just a different part of the church. And what you're looking at here is the story of the birth of Christ and the three kings, the three wise men who are going to come and bring gifts. So the wise men are out sleeping in the desert, and the angel comes to wake them up. And the angel touches one of them on the hand, and he points up to the star and to say, you've got to follow that star. You've got to go now. But I love this capital because it's so charming. You see these three kings with mustaches and their crowns on. They're sleeping with their crowns on, and they're all snuggled up together under this blanket. And as the angel touches the hand of the one king, his eyes open and he wakes up, and it's time to go. So you see the whole story being told in this one simple carving. And if you imagine being a churchgoer at the time, and maybe you can't read, but you've heard these stories in church, and as you look around the church, you start to see the stories come to life, and you remember them, and they stay in your mind because of the images. Okay, a few more narrative or historiated capitals. It's another term, but we say historiated to mean narrative, to mean that these tell a story. These are from a church called Sainte Madeleine Church at Vézelay in France. And this one you're looking at one side of it, and the other side is the same. It's an elephant. Now it's broken at the trunk, so you don't see the trunk, but you can see pretty clearly that this is an elephant from the shape of it. But it's not exactly accurate, like the ears are too small. The shape of it isn't exactly right. And that's because whoever made this probably never saw an elephant. What they saw was an illuminated manuscript. We've been talking about manuscripts of Bibles, but there were other books that were circulating in the Middle Ages, including books called bestiaries. And bestiaries would have images of animals, exotic animals from around the world, all the beasts of the world, right? And some of them were accurate and some of them weren't. It was almost like a game of telephone. Somebody somewhere saw an elephant and described it to someone else or made a picture of it, and by the time it gets to a manuscript in France, it doesn't look exactly like an elephant anymore. And then that's where the picture comes that the person's using to make this capital. So these kind of, it's almost like an encyclopedia of the natural world. Here's another one from Vézelay. This shows the miracles of Saint Benedict. Saint Benedict was a monk who started one of the monastic orders, the Benedictine order. And what you're seeing in the center is a woman, and then Benedict is on the right. You can tell from his monk-like hairstyle. And a devil is on the left, and they're fighting over the soul of this woman. So it's an illustration of how your soul is always at risk of the devil getting you, and you have to always be praying and trusting in God. That's the lesson. And then this is my favorite one from Sainte Madeleine at Vézelay. This is the story of Moses and the Ten Commandments. We've been talking about this, right? How Moses comes back from the desert with the Ten Commandments one of which says that you should not worship graven images, and he comes back to find the Israelites worshiping this golden calf, which is a graven image. It's a cult statue. So he comes back wielding the tablets and drives this demon out of the golden calf while the Israelites look on. And the demon has this fiery hair and looks like something from, an old Twilight Zone TV show or something. And that's the kind of thing that would really stick in people's minds. You want to remember that there are 10 commandments? Well, look at this image. That's going to stay in your mind pretty well and remind you of the rules. Okay, the same church, Sainte Madeleine at Vézelay, also had an important carved portal, and we're going to look at that now. Now remember, when you're studying for the test, I'm not showing you lots and lots of churches, but you are seeing one portal from Moissac and one from Vézelay, so keep the two of them straight and what the subject matter is. All right, so we're seeing that same dynamic linearism that we saw in the Moissac tympanum here at the one from Vézelay. And Christ is again seated in the center, though he's in this almost sort of awkward, twisted pose, and his drapery is sort of swirling energetically around him, and his large hands are sort of emphasizing this very open gesture. Now, you might think at first glance that this is an image of Christ in majesty again, because that was very common, Christ at the Last Judgment. It's very common in this time period. But this one's actually different. And it has to do with the church itself. This church, so annoying, all this noise. This church of La Madeleine at Vézelay was the church where the, I think it was the Third Crusade launched from. And that meant that the King and Queen of France went to Vézelay and they said, we're officially starting the Third Crusade, and they set off from there. And so to kind of echo that theme of the crusade, we have this scene of Christ giving the mission to the apostles. And the mission is that they are supposed to go and spread the gospel. So his apostles are standing next to him on either side, and each is holding a book, because that's what you need if you're going to spread the gospels. You need a copy of the book. And remember how important it was to make these books. And Christ is essentially zapping them with the Holy Spirit. He looks a little bit like Emperor Palpatine there, with these lines coming out of his hands like lasers, and he's zapping them, but he's not zapping them with lasers. He's charging them with the Holy Spirit so that they're infused with it, and they will take that energy and go to all the corners of the world and spread Christianity. And in fact, all around this scene, around the sort of curve of the scene in these little boxes, are the heathens of the world. And they're shown sometimes in these like grotesque details, almost like the way the bestiaries got the animals of the world wrong. There were also books that would show the strange people of the world. So if you look up by the head of Christ, look just to the left of the head of Christ, and you'll see people that have the heads of dogs. Like, this is what people in Europe thought, that there were these really bizarre heathens in all corners of the world, people with their ears hanging down to their knees and heads of dogs and all kinds of strange people, and that their job was to bring them all to Christianity. Here's an expanded view of that same tympanum so that you can see the way Christ and the apostles are surrounded by the heathens of the world. Our final object from the Romanesque period is a good one. It's called the Bayeux Tapestry. It's It's actually an embroidery. It is wool embroidered on a long linen panel. And when I say long, let me get the exact measurement here. It is 200 feet long. It's about 18 inches high, about 1.5 feet high, and 200 feet long. So this is this very long narrative panel. You should think of this like an Ionic frieze on a Greek temple, like this long continuous frieze on which a story would be told, and it would be wrapped around a building. So this piece of fabric would do the same thing, except it probably hung on the interior of a building all around it, like right down the nave of the church along the sides or something. And it tells the story of an important historical event. It's from 1077, that's when this was made, and it tells about an event that happened in 1066. Does anyone know what happened in 1066? It was the Norman conquest and the Battle of Hastings. That's when the Normans in France invaded England. So this is one of the most important pictorial works from the Middle Ages because it has such an incredible wealth of detail. William the Conqueror was the king in France, in Normandy, and he crossed the English Channel to invade England. I'm getting interrupted by the lawnmower again. I'm going to pause. Okay, I'm going to try to continue now. I hope this works with the pausing. Okay, so this is telling the story of the Norman conquest. And it begins by telling events that happened before the conquest, and then it goes on to sort of show what happened. So let's just run through it. Oh dear. Okay. So we have the death of Edward the Confessor, who was the king in England. And then the new king, Harold, swears an oath to William, who is supposed to be his king above him. And you can see there's a caption in Latin that says, Harold sacramentum fecit. Harold makes this oath to William. You see his name below, William. But Harold became king anyway. There he is, becoming king. And that's breaking his oath, and that causes William the Conqueror to feel he has to invade. So it goes on to show details of the battle, but there's also shipbuilding and all kinds of other fun details beforehand, including things like agricultural scenes. And then this is my favorite. It shows Halley's Comet up in the air, and look at the people pointing at it. And you see the word stella, meaning star. That was taken as a really important omen at the time. They saw that and they were like, oh my gosh, we definitely have to invade then. So an astronomical event like that appearing on an artifact like this is so exciting because it allows all the dates to really become very clear. Now I want to tell you that I have on Blackboard, on the page that says web links, there's an animated version of this tapestry. The little video, it's a YouTube video, the whole thing is probably only, I don't know, 4 minutes long or something. But I encourage you to watch it because it lets you see the whole story and it translates all of the Latin captions into English so that you can follow the whole story. So I would say go there and watch that little video now. I'm sorry for all the noise on this recording. I hope that it all worked.